Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, April 9th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are looking at a pleasant high of 81.7 degrees with a low of 55.7, so it should be a nice day if you have plans to be outside. Coming up, we're investigating the highly suspicious betting activity on Polymarket that appeared to foresee a surprising ceasefire between Donald Trump and Iran. We will also explore the unsettling details of how Rex Heuermann managed to successfully obscure a hidden life of murder for such a long period of time. Beyond those investigative reports, we will cover several other significant stories making headlines across the country today. All this and more is coming up on Alex's News, so make sure to stay tuned. We start this morning with a story that sits at the intersection of war, diplomacy, and a whole lot of money. Just 2 days ago, President Trump stunned the world by announcing a ceasefire with Iran, ending weeks of escalation some outlets have called the 12-day war. But the real shock came after, when investigators discovered that someone appeared to know the deal was coming and bet big on it. Ethan covers financial markets for us and has been tracking this one closely. Ethan, take us back to Tuesday evening. What exactly happened?
So picture the mood on Tuesday. All day long, President Trump had been posting on Truth Social, issuing what can only be described as an apocalyptic ultimatum. He told Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern, or, in his words, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight," end quote. The world was genuinely bracing for a massive military strike. Then, at roughly 6:30 p.m., 90 minutes before his own deadline, Trump announced a 2-week truce that left just about everyone blindsided.
And this truce didn't just materialize out of nowhere. How did it come together?
It didn't. The Washington Post and the Pakistani newspaper Dawn both report it was the result of something called the Islamabad Accord. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir had been quietly mediating behind the scenes. Al Jazeera and Modern Diplomacy actually noted that some framework discussions were reported as early as April 5th, 2 days before the announcement. But the final deal clearly caught most of the public off guard, which is exactly what makes the betting activity so suspicious.
Right, and that's where Polymarket comes in. For listeners who aren't familiar, what is Polymarket?
It's a prediction market platform where people use cryptocurrency to bet on real-world events, everything from elections to geopolitical outcomes. In this case, there was an active contract asking whether there'd be a U.S.-Iran ceasefire. With Trump threatening annihilation, most people were betting no. Shares on the yes side were dirt cheap, trading at roughly 9 cents on the dollar. That made it incredibly lucrative for anyone who knew a deal was actually in the works.
And someone apparently did know. What did investigators find?
According to data analysis from the Globe and Mail and the Associated Press, as reported by U.S. News and World Report, at least 50 new crypto wallet accounts were created on or just before April 7th, specifically to bet yes on the ceasefire. These weren't casual bets either. One wallet, created at 10 a.m. that morning, poured $72,000 into yes shares and walked away with a $200,000 profit. Another account was created the day before, focused solely on this one event, and netted $125,500.
50 new accounts all betting the same way on the same day. That's a lot of lucky guesses.
That's exactly the problem. Blockchain analytics firms like Bubble Maps and Look On Chain dug into the data, and what they found, according to The Guardian and Bloomberg, is that many of these accounts used something called wallet splitting. It's a technique where you create multiple wallets to disguise the fact that one person or one group controls all of them. Crucially, several of these wallets were traced back to the same shared Binance deposit address. That's a very strong indicator we're looking at a single actor or a tightly coordinated ring, not 50 independent people who all had the same hunch.
How much money are we talking about in total?
A group of roughly 10 primary suspicious accounts collectively wagered around $160,000. Their combined expected payout is over $1 million. But perhaps the most jaw-dropping detail involves one account created just 12 minutes before Trump's post. That account wagered nearly $32,000, and earned a $48,500 profit in what amounted to minutes. That timing alone raises enormous red flags.
Is there one trader in particular that investigators are focused on?
There is. An account operating under the handle NOTHINGEVERFRICKINGHAPPENS has drawn serious scrutiny. According to Gizmodo and reports on Binance Square, this user has what analysts are calling a historically perfect track record on geopolitical bets. They reportedly profited over $85,000 by correctly predicting the start of the war back on February 28th, and even the timing of specific military strikes last June. That kind of consistency is almost impossible without access to privileged information, or at the very least, an extraordinary analytical edge.
Now, not everyone's convinced this is insider trading. What's the counterargument?
There's actually a really interesting debate happening right now. Some analysts, according to the New Haven Register, point to what they're calling the taco theory, which stands for Trump always chickens out. The idea is that the president has a well-documented pattern of making dramatic military threats and then pivoting to a deal at the last minute. If you believe that pattern is reliable, betting on a ceasefire isn't insider trading, it's just reading the room. On top of that, Al Jazeera and Modern Diplomacy noted that Pakistan's mediation wasn't entirely secret. Sophisticated open-source intelligence traders could have pieced together the public signals and calculated that a deal was more likely than the market reflected.
But lawmakers aren't buying that explanation.
Not at all. U.S. Representative Blake Moore, a Republican from Utah, said it's, quote, highly unlikely, end quote, that these were good faith trades. He and a bipartisan group of lawmakers are now pushing the Public Integrity and Financial Prediction Markets Act of 2026. That bill would broaden existing insider trading laws to cover prediction markets under both the Stock Act and the Commodities Exchange Act. Right now, there's a significant legal gray area because Polymarket operates in crypto and doesn't fall neatly under traditional securities regulation.
So where do things stand with the actual payouts? Has anyone collected yet?
No, and that's a key part of the story today. As of this morning, Polymarket has labeled the ceasefire contract as disputed. All payouts are frozen while something called the UMA Optimistic Oracle conducts a final review. The dispute centers on whether a, quote, mutually agreed halt in direct military engagement, end quote, has actually taken place. The Wall Street Journal and the Hindu report that while direct U.S.-Iran strikes have stopped, the situation on the ground is far from settled.
What do you mean by far from settled?
Well, Iran's Revolutionary Guard still exercises de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz and is reportedly demanding a transit fee of $1 to $2 million per vessel. Intercepted missiles and drones continue flying over Saudi Arabia and the UAE from proxy forces. And then there's what happened yesterday. Israel conducted massive airstrikes against Hezbollah in Beirut on April 8th. The U.S. maintains Lebanon isn't covered by the ceasefire, but Iran says those strikes violate the 10-point proposal that underpins the Islamabad Accord. So the Oracle has to decide whether this messy reality counts as a ceasefire or not, and millions of dollars hinge on that decision.
This story also spilled into traditional markets, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and that's what elevates this beyond a crypto curiosity. The Guardian and Bloomberg both reported a massive spike in oil futures trading volume, both Brent and WTI contracts, in the minutes before Trump's post. Once the ceasefire was announced, oil prices plunged about 15%. The pattern strongly suggests the same insiders who were betting on Polymarket may have also been front-running the news in traditional commodities markets. That would put this squarely in the crosshairs of existing financial regulators like the CFTC.
Has anything like this happened before on Polymarket?
It has, and the precedent is striking. Back in February of this year, Israel's Shin Bet security agency arrested an Israeli Air Force major and a civilian accomplice. They'd been using classified military intelligence to place winning bets on Polymarket during earlier phases of the conflict. The account, which operated under the handle RicoSuave666, led to indictments for serious security offenses and bribery. That case showed this isn't just a financial crime. It's a national security problem when people inside military and intelligence circles realize they can monetize what they know on these platforms.
So what happens next? Is there a deadline for resolving this?
The Heuermann Oracle operates on a 48-hour resolution window, so we're approaching a decision point very soon. Once that window closes, the contract will either pay out or be voided entirely. Meanwhile, federal authorities are under growing pressure to determine whether the Islamabad Accord was leaked to a single actor before the rest of the world learned about it. Lawmakers want answers, and the push for new legislation is gaining real momentum on both sides of the aisle.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that. A really complex story that will no doubt be following in the days ahead.
Happy to be here, Grace. This one's far from over.
And we do have more news ahead this morning. When we come back, story number 2. We turn now to a story that's haunted Long Island for nearly 2 decades. Yesterday, the man known as the Gilgo Beach serial killer stood in a Suffolk County courtroom and admitted to murdering 8 women. Chloe has been following this case closely. Chloe, walk us through what happened in that courtroom.
Rex Heuermann, a 62-year-old former architect from Massapequa Park, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of intentional murder. He also admitted to an 8th killing as part of the plea deal. According to ABC News and the Associated Press, Heuermann showed almost no emotion as he confessed. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison without any possibility of parole.
8 women. Can you tell us who the victims were?
The case first became known through the so-called Gilgo Four. Those are Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Their remains were discovered in 2010 and 2011 along Ocean Parkway. Beyond those 4, Heuermann also admitted to killing Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, and Sandra Castilla. Castilla's death goes all the way back to 1993, making it the earliest known killing in the entire spree.
And you mentioned an 8th victim who came up during the plea deal?
That's right. Her name is Karen Vergata. Heuermann admitted to killing her in 1996. Her remains were found in 2 separate locations, at Fire Island and near to Bay Beach. ABC7 New York reports that Heuermann told the court he met many of these women, most of whom were sex workers, strangled them, and then dismembered several of them before scattering their remains along Long Island's South Shore. It's a level of detail that was very difficult for the family sitting in that courtroom to hear.
Now, there's one name that a lot of people associate with this case, and that's Shanann Gilbert. Where does she fit in?
This is an important distinction. Shanann Gilbert's disappearance in 2010 is actually what led police to find the other bodies in the first place. But Heuermann says he had nothing to do with her death, and the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office agrees. CBS News reports her death is still officially classified as an undetermined accidental drowning. Her family, though, has never accepted that ruling. They've pushed back against it for years. So even with yesterday's plea, Shanann Gilbert's case remains unresolved in the eyes of the people closest to her.
Let's talk about the evidence. How did investigators finally connect Heuermann to these murders after so many years?
The breakthrough really started with a pizza crust. The New York Times and CNN previously detailed how investigators followed Heuermann in Manhattan back in 2023 and recovered a discarded pizza crust he'd tossed into a trash can. DNA from that crust matched a hair found on the burlap used to restrain one of the victims. That single piece of evidence tied him directly to a crime scene. Once they had that match, they were able to get warrants that cracked the whole thing wide open.
And I understand there was something found on his computers that really shocked investigators?
Absolutely chilling. Investigators seized 58 hard drives from Heuermann's property. On a deleted partition of one of those drives, they found a document titled HK 2002-04. It contained 87 specific entries that prosecutors described as essentially a how-to guide for murder. There were checklists labeled things like body prep, which included instructions for removing tattoos, a supplies section, and a category called Things to Remember with notes like, quote, sound travels, end quote. NBC News reports that prosecutors called it the work of a man living a secret life of abduction and torture while keeping up a facade as a suburban father and working architect. Heuermann apparently referred to his crimes in those notes as, quote, playtime, end quote.
That is deeply disturbing. What happens next in terms of sentencing?
Heuermann is scheduled to be formally sentenced on June 17th, a little over 2 months from now. According to NPR, he'll receive multiple consecutive life sentences without parole. But here's the part that caught my attention. A unique condition of his plea deal requires him to cooperate with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the BAU. They're treating it as an academic exercise to understand how, what they call an organized predator, managed to hide in plain sight for 3 decades.
So the FBI wants to study him?
They do. The BAU is specifically interested in how Heuermann used his architectural training and his digital knowledge to evade capture for so long. Think about it. This is a man who kept detailed procedural notes and maintained dozens of hard drives. The FBI also wants to question him about other unsolved cases. They're looking at the 2017 disappearance of Julia Ann Bean in South Carolina and the so-called Eastbound Strangler murders in Atlantic City. There's no confirmation he's connected to those, but investigators clearly believe there may be more to learn.
This case also exposed some serious problems inside the Suffolk County Police Department, didn't it?
It really did, and that's a wound that hasn't healed on Long Island. While District Attorney Ray Tierney credited the multi-agency task force formed in 2022 for making the arrest, CBS News and Newsday have pointed out that much of the evidence that led to Heuermann was actually a decade old. For example, a witness tip from 2010 about Heuermann's Chevrolet Avalanche sat completely uninvestigated for 12 years. That's a tip that could have potentially stopped him much sooner.
Why did that tip go nowhere for so long?
A big part of the answer is corruption at the top. Former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke actually served prison time for obstruction of justice. He famously blocked the FBI from participating in the Gilgo Beach investigation back in 2012. Critics have said for years that Burke's interference allowed Heuermann to remain a free man for an additional decade. It's one of the most troubling aspects of this entire case. The system that was supposed to protect these women was undermined from within.
Now, the Gilgo Beach discoveries turned up several sets of remains over the years. Have all of those been accounted for?
Not all of them, and that's why the task force isn't going anywhere. There has been some progress, though. In late 2025, remains that had been known only as Peaches and Baby Doe were finally identified as Tanya Denise Jackson and her infant daughter Tatiana. Fox 5 New York reported that Andrew Dykes, the child's father and a retired Army veteran, was arrested for their 1997 murders. Investigators determined that was a case of domestic violence completely unrelated to Heuermann.
So a separate crime entirely. Are there still unidentified remains?
There is one. The person known as Asian Doe is the only victim from the 2010 and 2011 discoveries who has never been identified. The task force is currently using something called microbial DNA testing, which analyzes unique bacteria found on the remains to try to determine where the person lived. It's cutting-edge science, and they're hoping it gives them a geographic lead. Suffolk County authorities have been very clear that they won't disband the task force until every set of remains found on that beach is identified and accounted for.
What was the scene like in that courtroom yesterday? How did the families react?
The courtroom was packed with relatives of the victims. Melissa Cann, who is the sister of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, told ABC News that the day was about the, quote, women's lives who were stolen, end quote. It was emotional but also measured. These families have been waiting years and in some cases decades for answers. Heuermann's defense attorney Michael Brown said his client chose to plead guilty to spare both his own family and the victims, families the trauma of a drawn-out public trial.
Was Heuermann's family there?
His ex-wife, Asa Ellerup, attended the hearing. She offered her condolences to the families and maintained that she and her children had absolutely no knowledge of Heuermann's crimes. That's been her position since his arrest. It's hard to imagine living in the same house with someone capable of this and not knowing, but investigators have not charged her or anyone else in connection with the murders. The focus now shifts to that June sentencing and what else Heuermann might reveal during his cooperation with the FBI.
A 17-year mystery finally reaching its conclusion, though clearly there's still more work to be done. Chloe, thank you for walking us through all of this.
Of course, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Mother Nature has been turning up the thermostat as April reports from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration show March 2026 was the warmest in the 132-year record for the continental United States. The mercury hit an average of 50.85 degrees, which was a whopping 9.35 degrees above the 20th century norm. This wasn't just a warm spell. It was a record-breaking fever for the lower 48. The Associated Press reports that over 19,800 daily heat records were absolutely shattered, with 10 states, including California, Texas, and Arizona, setting all-time monthly highs. Scientists say this sizzle was served up by a persistent heat dome and a super-strength El Niño, making it virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. This hot topic has left nearly 60% of the country parched in drought, the largest dry spell since 2022, putting the squeeze on water management and hydropower in the Colorado River Basin. Meteorologists at Northern Illinois University warn that this global warming trend could keep things cooking through late 2026. Moving to the legal circuit, PacifiCorp is feeling some relief after the Oregon Court of Appeals threw a bucket of water on a $1 billion wildfire damage award. A 3-judge panel found a lower court judge played with fire by telling jurors they could assume evidence for 4 separate fires, including the Santiam Canyon, Echo Mountain Complex, South Oban Chain, and 242 fires, applied to all 2,500 class members. The court found this legally erroneous, as the fires were geographically separate. This victory for the Berkshire Hathaway-owned utility means the case is heading back to the Multnomah County Circuit Court. While PacifiCorp remains open to resolving reasonable claims, the ruling puts property owners in a legal limbo, potentially delaying hundreds of mini-trials scheduled for 2026 and 2027. A former Army operational support specialist is in a bit of a leaky situation. Courtney Williams, age 40, was arrested for allegedly spilling the beans on an elite special military unit identified as Delta Force. Prosecutors say Williams held a top-secret clearance but willfully shared national defense information with a journalist, leading to a book and article that put secretive tradecraft and tactics in the spotlight. Williams, who was previously suspended following an internal investigation in 2015 and 2016, now faces up to 10 years in prison under the Espionage Act. Across the Atlantic, thousands in Dakar have taken their grievances to the pavement. Protesters are marching against a cost-of-living crisis and broken promises from the administration of President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The situation is reaching a boiling point after the government betrayed a 2025 agreement to freeze strikes, and over 700 workers at the port of Dakar were given their marching orders. Senegal is currently drowning in a debt-to-GDP ratio of 132%, following a $13 billion deficit, while a global energy crisis linked to the war in Iran has oil prices doubling. To trim the fat, the government has even banned ministers from non-essential foreign travel. This unrest signals a major challenge for the ruling party, which brought ambitious reforms to power in 2024. Finally, state climate targets are short-circuiting as AI-driven data centers gobble up the grid. In Nevada, utilities warn they might miss renewable goals because new data centers will require triple the power currently used by Las Vegas. North Carolina is keeping coal plants on life support to meet demand, and NextEra Energy has scrapped its 2045 zero emissions target entirely. With data centers expected to consume 12% of all United States electricity by 2028, 22 states are now looking at legislation to make tech giants pay their own way and shield residents from soaring utility bills. This comes as the Trump administration encourages coal use to support the tech surge, despite ratepayer protection pledges from companies like Google and Meta. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.